Hi everyone, I'm Daniel. I'm R&D director at Tools, which does automated visual testing. So what we're going to talk about today, I named the talk Deep Hacking Appium for Fun and Profit, which is exactly what we do. Deep hacking is kind of a relative term, but what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to walk you through an Appium contribution that we've recently made regarding adding visual capabilities to Appium, which will allow us as Tools to get things that we need in order to perform full visual testing. All right, so as I said, we're going to go through a case study, and once we finish that, we'll have conclusions and a short demo. Okay, so what's the case study? Well, what we want to do is basically add an additional capability to Appium. Specifically, what we needed was what we call a full-page screenshot. So in web, for example, if you ever use Tools or any other tool, when you get a screenshot, you get only the viewport part of the web browser. And as a user, as a developer, usually you're interested in not just seeing the current part in the browser, you want to see the entire content of your page. That's what you want to visually validate. And with mobile, you basically have the same issue, right? You ask for a screenshot and you get only the viewport of the mobile. It's actually a little bit worse than that because you get the device screen, which includes status bar or soft buttons, etc. So what we want to do is add the capability to Appium to get the entire content of some scrollable element, something that has content in addition to what you just see in the viewport. And the way to do that is basically add a number of capabilities to Appium. For example, getting the true viewport, which is only the content of the viewport of the application, like I said, without the status bar or soft buttons. Deterministic scrolling, which means that if you ever try to swipe, not just with Appium, but generally with automation framework for mobile, you don't always end up at the same place, even if you run the same command twice. And several other capabilities, like getting the device pixel ratio, because we need scaling, etc. OK. We're going to basically focus on getting the true viewport. That's the feature that I'm going to show you how exactly did we add it to Appium. So if any of you are ever looked at Appium on GitHub, it's not just one repository, right? It's a variety of repositories, each one doing specific thing. For example, you have clients, you have specific drivers for Android or for iOS, etc. So the first thing that we needed to know was where do we start? What should we do? And we start here and here, which are basically two pictures I took without permission. Sorry, Jonathan and Isaac. I took the one without the beard, so it's a good match now. Yeah, it's correct again. So you go to the Appium community. Specifically, you can talk to the contributors and the people who manage the repositories, like we did, and they're awesome help. We got a lot of direction where we should start, and I'm going to basically give the intro to what we got. OK, so this is kind of an old, relatively old architecture for Appium and iOS. I took it from Jonathan's presentation way back. It's still kind of relevant. There are small changes. I'll talk about them. But the basic idea is that for Android, you have an actual part of Appium which runs on the device, gets the commands, and can execute them. And for iOS, it's kind of, at least in UI automation, it was kind of running JavaScript via command line for the UI automation framework. It's a little bit different. I'll discuss what it means for us. For iOS, you now have XUI test WebDriver, which is obviously better. And since UI automation has been deprecated in Xcode 8, I think, or 8 point something. OK. So the hierarchy that we care about, which means the repositories we care about. We have the client side, which is the part which actually runs on Appium. It includes the BaseDriver. So the BaseDriver is the parent driver for all the drivers in Appium, like the Android, the UI Automator driver, or the XUI test driver, or the UI automation driver. You have the actual implementations, the Appium iOS driver and the UI Automator 2 driver. And you have, like I said, in Android, you have the device side part, which is the UI Automator 2. Sorry, it's written driver, it should be server. I'll fix that. But it's the actual part which executes commands on the device itself. All right. So we'll take a look at the Appium BaseDriver. Basically, like I said, it's the parent class for all the Appium drivers. Most of the commands are found here, the basic implementation. It has the actual commands which you can run on the device, scrolling, for example, or getting the screenshot or whatever at the commands part, obviously. It includes a set of utilities that you can use, the helpers. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but image helpers, for example, is something that we've also added, and the helpers themselves, the helpers.js file. And it includes the routes.js file, which basically defines all the endpoints in Appium. So if you want to communicate with an Appium server, you go through the routes.js file. OK, so as I mentioned, this is where you start. You want to add any capability to Appium, you need to go through here. Either you extend an existing command, or you add a new API point. Either way, this is something that's usually discussed with the Appium team. There's actually kind of an additional nuance. You can have an additional functionality added through the mobile execute, mobile prefix for the execute command. So if we're not completely decided on what the endpoint should be, usually this is the way to go. You add a functionality with the execute command with the mobile prefix, and later on you can combine it in some standard way. All right. So commands themselves, the commands part in the Appium BaseDriver. The index.js file is basically just loading everything up, everything in the directory. As you can see, there's an object assigned there. And the commands implementation themselves is divided into files based on the category. It's relatively easy to implement. Again, I'm not sure it's very clear, but for example, this is the get session command. Just JavaScript, plain implementation, very easy to work with. OK, so like I said, we needed the true viewport. We wanted the viewport, again, without status bar, soft buttons, etc. So when we discussed this with the Appium team, at first we had a thought of adding a viewport screenshot endpoint. But eventually, after we tried it and after a few more discussions, we got to the decision to add it, again, as a mobile execute command, which is what I'll just demonstrate in a minute. So mobile commands in general. These are actually execute commands, like you do driver execute in Selenium WebDriver or Appium. You can run JavaScript to do something. You just give it the mobile colon prefix, and the Appium code itself will search for that prefix, and if it finds that, it will do something specific. So execute.js on the top exists both in Android and in iOS. And as you can see at the top line there, it actually searches for the mobile prefix. And if it finds it, then it executes something specific. Specifically, this is from iOS, if I'm not mistaken. You have the execute mobile function, which search for the specific command, either scroll or, on our case, the viewport screenshot command. All right. So viewport screenshot command. Again, when you want to add any command to Appium, you basically add it to the commands part. We added a viewport section, and implemented that command there. So the top one is from iOS, and the bottom one is from Android. Sorry, the other way around. Top one is Android, bottom one is iOS. This is an implementation of the command. It's relatively simple. So eventually, it's pretty simple to add any implementation to Appium once you figure out where you need to go. All right. So we covered this part, which is the Appium BaseDriver, the iOS driver, and the UI Automator 2 driver. Like I said, so parent class, implementation for iOS, and implementation for Android. And we're left with the server-side part. OK, so server-side part, this is basically the UI Automator server repository. What you need to do sometimes, not always, but you sometimes need to implement specific commands there, which means you need to do Java code. Specifically, this is an example of using Java to get the device pixel ratio, which is something that we needed in order to know how to scale the images correctly. We added it in the UI Automator server, and we called it from Appium itself. All right. Oh, this was a lot quicker than I thought. I'm sorry. So basically, like I said, summing it up, you have to have the Appium BaseDriver. You have to have the either UI Automator 2 driver or iOS driver or XUI test driver. This is the Appium BaseDriver parent class, other two actual implementations. You might need to add something on the server itself, which means on the device. And the last part, which is also pretty important, but which took us most of the time, is actually adding tests to prove that this functionality works and works correctly before any pull request is actually being accepted. And the last part that you need to do is actually contribute and make the pull request. OK, so conclusion. Adding a feature to Appium is not impossible. It's actually pretty straightforward. What you need to remember is basically the structure, which means where you want to add all the stuff. And you probably need to be familiar with JavaScript, because Appium is written in JavaScript. Yeah. One more thing. For us, we used basically 3 persons to do the contribution, because even though you're adding capabilities to Appium, you're usually adding capabilities based on the device itself. So you want to be familiar with both Android and iOS, so UI Automator or XUI, etc. Contributing features takes a while because you have a back and forth with the repository maintainer, which is important because you want to add contribution which match the design and the way that the repo is built. And besides that, Appium has a really great team. It was a lot of help, both from Jason and Isaac. And just to show you what we did eventually, Adam, can we display the video? Yeah, I think he. No. All right, so no. Oh. Well, I'll be at my stand at Applitools, so you can come over and I'll show you the demo live, not the video. So quicker than I thought, I apologize, but if you have any questions, of course, then I'm happy to answer.